Welcome to a special edition of Cybersecurity Today and Hashtag Trending for Monday, July 22nd, 2024. I'm Jim Love, sitting in for Howard Solomon this week on the Cybersecurity Today podcast and in my usual chair on Hashtag Trending. Although Howard did come in on Friday to post a story on Tech News Day, our online publication, our headline, one word, CrowdStrike. We thought it was our job to summarize the situation to date. However, it's tricky because given that many of you are involved in this directly, some of this might not be news. And for those of you who are working on the frontline response, you have our support and sympathy. This is tough, and you are not alone. Forums and social media are rife with the frustrated comments of those who are probably still working on this. Here's just a smattering of the messages we've seen, and as used as I am to some tough talk in tech forums, I don't think I've ever seen so many F-bombs. And it's no wonder. Cybersecurity is frustrating enough. There have been a number of reports, and you've no doubt heard them, anywhere from 28% of chief information security officers or CISOs, or up to 51% of security professionals in general are likely to leave their jobs over the next 2 years because of burnout. But here's a sample from one Reddit forum on this CrowdStrike incident. One, expletive, F-bomb, minuscule moment of not having another, expletive, F-bomb, thing to be anxious about. Another expletive, we should just return to the caves. At least the bear attacks were quick. Sorry, it's sad but funny. Another describes what it was like for a lot of security professionals who realized right away that this was no ordinary outage. Here's what one post said. My wife's machine BSOD'd, or blue screen of death, live when this happened. And I was like, you're going to read about this in the news tomorrow. I don't think you're going to get in trouble with your boss. He goes on to say, I felt like the cop in Dark Knight Rises telling the rookie, you're in for a show tonight. And when my pager started to go off tonight, my wife asked if it was bad, I said the same thing. You're going to read about this one in the news tomorrow. So people are angry. It's made the news. And why? Well, right now, they're angry at a security firm called CrowdStrike. Most of you will know them. As the CIO in the former IT World Canada, I knew them because they monitored and filtered out distributed denial of service or DDoS attacks. Over the years, they've expanded, and today they provide a wide range of cybersecurity products and services. And it was one of those products marketed under the name Falcon that is at the root of this disaster. Falcon, according to one description, provides endpoint detection and response products by monitoring traffic passing through systems to protect against malicious files, viruses, and malware, relying heavily on cloud technology to protect internet-connected devices on corporate networks. And in fact, CrowdStrike is quite large. They're second only to Microsoft. CrowdStrike was reported by Gartner in 2023 to have up to 15% of the market share in the security segment. Still not Microsoft's 40%, but significant. Little known fact, the COO, I believe, of CrowdStrike is a Canadian. I've interviewed her on our show. It's quite a large company and it has a big footprint. Look at these stats, and this comes from CrowdStrike's own site. 298 of the Fortune 500 companies use CrowdStrike. 538 of the Fortune 1000 companies use CrowdStrike. 43% of the top 50 U.S. states. 8 of the top 10 financial services firms, 8 of the top 10 healthcare providers, 7 of the top 10 manufacturers, 8 out of the top 10 auto companies, and 8 out of the top 10 technology firms. That's just the top of their market. As I pointed out, IT World wasn't anywhere near that size, and we and a lot of other small and mid-sized companies use them as well. Hell, why wouldn't you use the software that so many of these leading companies used? But here's the flip side to that, and that is if all of these companies use the same software and that software company screws up, it hits a lot of firms around the world. And it gets worse, because what if that screw-up affects the operating system that every major company uses? Microsoft Windows. Then it's a disaster, and that's exactly what happened. An error in an update threw Windows machines across the world into a blue screen of death, or BSOD. If you've been around in IT for any length of time, you've seen this. It actually used to happen regularly on almost every Windows machine at one time or another. In the olden days, to make systems faster and more responsive, certain functions, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but if memory serves me, no pun intended, it was classically graphics functions, wrote directly to the kernel. And the kernel is the lowest level of the operating system. It talks directly to the hardware. And when it fails, it can take the machine down with it. And so the operating system can't restart unless it can use the kernel. So in the olden days, and to this day apparently, any instruction that was even a little wonky could crash the machine and the blue screen of death would appear. But in most cases, you just power down and restart your machine and that would fix it. Over the years, however, people have stayed away from writing directly to the kernel and put some software guardrails and error handling, so we've seen a whole lot less of these errors. But some software still directly interacts with the kernel, and one of those is, you guessed it, CrowdStrike's Falcon endpoint detection and response software. I'm presuming, I've read, and it makes sense, that the reason they do this is greater speed and protection. If malware activity is detected, they can block it directly. Whatever the reason, they do it. So when CrowdStrike released an update to their software and an error was in it, it caused an endless loop of blue screen of death errors on many Windows machines. It wasn't a cyber attack, or as many thought, a Windows update problem, and Microsoft was really clear about that. The source of the problem was the CrowdStrike update. How big is the impact? Microsoft estimates that CrowdStrike's update affected 8.5 million Windows devices. That came from a post by David Weston, the vice president at Microsoft, and he says that this number is less than 1% of Windows machines worldwide, but that the broad economic and societal impacts reflect the use of CrowdStrike by enterprises that run many critical services. Or in smaller words, it was only 8.5 million machines, but they happen to be in the companies that run most of what we use. Now, Microsoft keeps tabs on its software worldwide, so this is unlikely to be wrong. The BBC, however, reported that it was only Windows 10 machines that were affected. We haven't confirmed that, although if there is some feature that kept Windows 11 machines from failing, you will see Microsoft pushing that story like mad as one more reason to move up to Windows 11. But maybe Microsoft might keep a low profile on this one. They've taken enough hits on security failures in the past 12 months. And what do they say about people who live in glass houses? You don't throw stones, especially when you have a single pane of glass. But to put this in perspective, this is being called the worst cyber event in history. Some are calling it the Y2K we never had. The WannaCry cyber attack in 2017 was estimated to hit only 300,000 computers in 150 countries, and that was regarded as an earth-shaking crisis. There was a similar attack called NotPetya a month later, same thing. By comparison, a 6-hour outage in 2021 at Meta, which runs Instagram, Facebook, and WhatsApp, or the DNS error that took out a lot of companies on the eastern seaboard a while ago, seemed pretty mild by comparison. This damage was catastrophic. I'm sure we've all heard in the media of the places that were affected. Airlines stopped flying, many companies could no longer function, people couldn't pump gas, 911 services went down, medical services were affected. The list goes on. And estimates of the economic impact are just guesses at this point, but it will be in the many millions of dollars and maybe even, some say, in the billions of dollars. Now, the crazy thing is that error was in place for just a little over an hour. One report shows the timestamps on the first erroneous update as 0409 UTC, or Coordinated Universal Time. And for those who don't know that, that's like Greenwich Mean Time, only it doesn't change with daylight savings. The fix is at 0527 UTC, 1 hour and 18 minutes. But what an impact that had. In a relatively short period of time, I don't have the exact timing on that, there was a fix identified and published. We published it, many others did. You can get the latest of that on the CrowdStrike site. But there's a catch. You have to install and fix that manually and locally, machine by machine. And it's going to take a lot of time and resources, and if indeed you could even get to all of the machines, the sheer volume alone will strain resources beyond the breaking point. Plus, we no longer have all of our computers in our offices. Many are remote, and there may even be remote devices running Windows that are really hard to reach. Some might not even have keyboards or even monitors. So we understand the frustration of those who have to handle this, and the companies that have been interrupted, and the customers whose lives were affected. Everybody's angry. The stock price for CrowdStrike fell as much as 15% on Friday, and the stock closed down at a loss of almost 9%. But believe it or not, it's not the worst showing for CrowdStrike stock. It fell by almost 15% in November of 2022, but it came back. But as we all know, somebody has to be to blame. I may be cynical in my old age, but I've always said that if there was a disaster and you went to a meeting and you couldn't spot the scapegoat, it's because it was you. When something like this happens, somebody usually loses their job. And even those who are defending the programmers or testers who supposedly missed this error still have someone to blame. One post says somebody's getting fired. An F-up of this magnitude is the result of culture and process, not one engineer. Blameless PIRs are critical for things like this, and it's how you understand the true cause that led you there rather than just firing Gary because he was the one who pushed the button. I don't think that the person at CrowdStrike is named Gary, but you get the point. And I'm going to say, I don't know what happened, but it is a valid question kept going through my mind. Why didn't this get caught in testing? And I've been searching around to find an answer. And before we rush to blame some programmer or tester or even corporate culture, I saw at least one good tech demonstration of how this could pass testing and could still be issued with that error. I'll post a link to it in the show notes for you today. Check it out yourself. And if, like me, your programming days are long behind you, it still makes sense. Somebody could have written a program, tested it without the null entries because they didn't expect them, and in the real world, there were null entries. It's not the first time it's ever happened. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm saying if you were wondering how the hell this could happen, hopefully we'll find out. If CrowdStrike is smart, we'll get the facts of what happened exactly. But before we do, we shouldn't rush to judgment. And for all those people who are saying people should test updates, I think they should as well. And I've always told people that it's important to keep your software up to date as the greatest protection against zero-day impacts, but we've always waited just a little bit of time to see if a Windows update would cause problems. That's been normal. But I've always pushed people to make sure endpoint detection software is always the latest. New attacks come by the hour, not by the day or the week. So before we blame the folks who updated their endpoint software, we might want to take a deep breath. There will be lessons learned from this, I am certain. I am thinking about having a special panel for our weekend show next week to have a deeper dive into this and with some perspective help all of us understand what we can do to avoid this in the future. One more point. Where there are problems like this, there are going to be people who take advantage of it. There has been a sharp rise in CrowdStrike-themed domain registrations. And these can only have one purpose: to trick IT managers or others into downloading malicious software thinking they're going to fix the CrowdStrike problem. If you do nothing else, make sure everyone who's working on this double checks to make sure they're on the CrowdStrike site for any fixes or information. That's our special show from both Cybersecurity Today and #Trending. I'm Jim Love. Thanks for listening. We'll be back with what we hope is the regular news in our next episodes.